It was a typically beautiful Honolulu morning, Sunday, December 7, 1941. Some were on their way to church, others sleeping off Saturday night fun, while the military and civilians enjoyed their quiet, comfortable, complacent dawn. 6 Japanese aircraft carriers were steaming to within flying range of Pearl Harbor and Ford Field. At exactly 7:48 a.m., the first of 353 Japanese planes started dropping bombs on the bulk of our country's Pacific Fleet, which was mostly lined up, tied up, still in the water, in the tiny harbor, sitting ducks. 9 minutes later, at 7:57 that awful morning, a radio message crackled across the island. Quote, "Air raid, Pearl Harbor, this is not a drill." In the stunning 2-hour surprise attack by Japanese aircraft and submarines, 18 ships were sunk or damaged. Most of nearly 300 Navy, Marine, and Air Corps planes were decimated where they sat on tarmacs. Only a handful of American military aircraft got off the ground. 29 Japanese planes were shot down that morning. More than 2,400 of our Marines, sailors, soldiers, and civilians died. Nearly 1,200 were wounded. The world would never be the same. In a speech to Congress and the country the next day, President Roosevelt, declaring war on Japan, referred to the previous day of the attack, quote, "a date that will live in infamy."
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Admiral Yamamoto, the Japanese fleet commander who masterminded the attack, said, quote, "I fear all we have done today is to awaken a great sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve," unquote. Little did he know. Fortunately, 75 years later, our countries are friends. The Japanese attack was intended to not only destroy much of our Pacific Fleet, but our morale as well. Roosevelt responded by pressing our military leaders to strike the Japanese homeland as soon as possible to send a message that attacking America was a big mistake. On April 18, 1942, just 4 months later, 80 American airmen, led by Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, in 16 B-25 medium bombers, successfully attacked many targets in Japan. All but 3 of the airmen survived that day. This morning, we will hear firsthand about the Doolittle raid from the pilot who shared the cockpit with his commander in the lead plane.
Well, the good news today, ladies and gentlemen, is that you are here to experience a really terrific Warbirds in Review session. And the other good news is that you have 2 beautiful B-25s to represent the Doolittle raid. The one small bit of bad news is that blocks the Jumbotron for some of you. But we have the technology. If you have a smartphone, go to flyingondemand.com, and you can watch it right here in your hand. while you're trying to look around and look at the Jumbotron. So we tried to position the airplanes to accommodate that, but our line crew does an absolutely wonderful job, but they can't make the B-25 see-through. So we hope you enjoy the presentation, regardless of whether you can see the Jumbotron or not. I'd like to thank a few people, and first of all, we have to thank our sustaining sponsor, which is Scott's Miracle Grow Company. Then we have Fagan Fighters, World War II Museum in Granite Falls, Minnesota. Really wonderful people with a great museum. Their son Evan will be talking about their B-25 just a little bit later. To the Kavanaugh Flight Museum. This is their airplane. You'll hear more about that connection in just a few minutes. To the Jelly Belly Company. They are a tremendous sponsor and a supporter of the Doolittle Center, and we'll be honored to hear from Jonna Doolittle here just in a little bit. And I'd like for you to take a look at this funny little camera here in front of me. That is the Jaunt Virtual Reality. We've added that so you can actually see this on your phone. There are 24 cameras here, which gives you a total experience of what you're seeing with this new technology. We like to keep adding things. Again, thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Hartman. Thank you. Thanks. Please welcome Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cole and Jonna Doolittle, who is General Doolittle's granddaughter and biography. Colonel Cole.
Thank you.
Dick, here. Thanks, Johnny. Yeah. Dick, looks like a lot of people have a lot of respect for you. Of course, Dick is highly decorated. 2 DFCs, Distinguished Flying Crosses with 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, Air Medal with 1 Oak Leaf Cluster, Bronze Star, many honors from the Chinese, Air Force Commendation, highly decorated for all the obvious reasons that we know about. Dick, how old were you when you put on your silver wings, Air Corps wings?
I was 26.
Which was later than most of the young pilots, right? At 26?
Yes.
So had you flown commercially before? Did you have a civil license?
No, to get into what I wanted to do aviation-wise, I had to spend some time working on the farm and get 2 years of college. And I heard about the civilian pilot training program that Uncle Sam is dangling in front of a lot of young guys. And I applied for it, and I got accepted and was able to go through the whole program.
Now, when were you assigned to a B-25 unit?
So,
When were you assigned to a B-25 unit? That was your first assignment, right? Was B-25s?
Yes.
After training,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And where were you stationed?
We got sent to Pendleton, Oregon, in the 17th Bombardment Group.
And your mission at the time was what? What were you doing?
Well, we were in the process of going to Columbia, South Carolina, and initially the 17th had 123s and B-18s, and finally we got some B-25s, and we were trained in them. I mean, we went on a mock tour to the southeast in Florida, and had a mock war with the Army at that time.
Now, how much did you know about the mission? How secret was it at the time? What did you know?
Well, we were just told that they wanted volunteers for a dangerous mission, and I had forgotten that when I enlisted, the first sergeant said, "Don't volunteer for anything."
But you volunteered anyway, and so did a lot of other guys.
Well, the whole group volunteered, including the commander. So, and I don't know of anybody that dropped out or
In the process.
Yeah. And several times during the training, Colonel Doolittle offered that if anybody wanted to drop out, there'd be no repercussions.
What was your reaction when you heard that Lieutenant then Colonel Doolittle was going to be your skipper?
Well, as a young lad, I was born and raised in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, and the first test base that the Army Air Corps had was McCook Field. And as a kid, I used to ride my bicycle over by McCook and sit on the river lever and watch all the old timers and what they were doing and so forth.
Including Doolittle.
Yes. And my mother and I had a scrapbook on aviation in Dayton. And he was a good part of it.
Jonna, what was your grandfather's reputation at this point when he came back on active duty to lead this mission?
Mostly, Granddad was thought of as kind of a daredevil, somebody who could do anything in an airplane, would take any risk. But the truth was he was a scientist, had his doctorate of science in aeronautical engineering from MIT, and Hap Arnold knew that. So when he pulled him in to lead the raid, he knew what kind of an education came with him.
Right. Jonna, how well did you know your grandparents? What was your age, and how well were you able to get to know them as adults?
I was really fortunate because growing up, my grandparents' house was Doolittle Central. My dad was in the Air Force, so we traveled all the time, and that was where, at that point in time, it was Santa Monica. And then when I went to college, I came back from Germany and spent my first year at UCLA, and I lived with them. And then, I tell you, he didn't die until 1993, and I had a daughter in high school and a daughter in middle school, so I was, up there.
So, Dick, when did you learn the details of what your mission was going to be in the Pacific?
Well, we didn't know anything about it until 2 days at sea, and they announced on the PA system that our target was Japan. And
so you'd flown to San Francisco, right? They hauled your airplanes up onto the Hornet.
Alameda.
Alameda.
Yeah.
And then you still did not know exactly what you were going to do at that point?
No, like I said, they didn't announce it until we were 2 days at sea. It was too far to swim, so I don't know of anybody that backed out or jumped ship.
So Colonel Doolittle at the time gave everybody another chance to bail out, right?
Yeah.
Pardon the pun. So nobody quit. So you learned what the mission was.
Well, the mission was supposed to let the Japanese people that they were could be struck by air. And the other thing was a morale booster for the U.S. and its allies. And we were all very proud of the fact that we did that.
There was a plan to launch at a certain distance from Japan.
Yeah.
What was that distance?
Well, in the Navy talks, that we were supposed to be taken in around 400 miles. But the Japanese had equipped a lot of their fishing boats with long-range radios, and unfortunately we were intercepted around 750 miles out, and we had to launch then.
So whose decision was that to launch early?
Yeah.
Who decided that?
I assumed it was Admiral Halsey. He was on the Yorktown and talking with Captain Missioner and Colonel Doolittle.
So what was Colonel Doolittle's attitude about the fact that you would have to launch early much farther than you wanted to from Japan?
Well, it caused a problem, and we had to go by what they wanted to launch. And we couldn't spare to lose any of any more aircraft carriers, because we only had 4 at that time. 2 were in Pearl Harbor and 2 were with us.
So how much fuel, extra fuel, were you able to take on your airplanes?
Well, the normal amount of fuel in a B-25 was around 600 and some gallons, and we ended up doubling the size. Plus, we had 10 5-gallon cans of fuel that the crew chief would dump in the gas tank where they put in the lower turret as we progressed out on the course.
But they had taken the guns out. You didn't have You didn't have any guns on board, so you made room for the extra fuel.
Yes. Our only armament was a 30 caliber in the nose, which was useless really. The turret in the upper turret in the back, the 250 caliber.
Right.
Yeah.
You launched. What were the winds, and how were they affecting what you thought was going to be your trajectory into Japan?
Yeah. When we launched, it was about 8 o'clock in the morning on the 18th. Originally, they had selected the launch date as the 19th, but since we got caught early, we had to launch when they said launch.
Right. So how were the winds as far as the trip to Japan? What were the winds? Helpful or not helpful?
Well, it was about 25 knots across the deck, and another 20 knots or so wind.
On your nose?
Yeah. We only needed about 20 knots to be airborne.
Right.
And
but what about headwinds to Japan? How concerned were you about that?
I don't remember what the headwinds were. I don't think there were any headwinds to Japan.
Jonna, do you recall at all? Excuse me.
Not so much of the headwinds, but I do know that the islands believed they were protected by the kamikaze winds throughout history. And it was those kamikaze winds that created tailwinds that blew the planes all the way to the coast.
Wow. So what time did you reach your targets? You've got your 16 airplanes, you all reached the targets. And what time was that in the morning in Japan?
We left the Hornet about 20 minutes after 8, and sometime close to noon or so, we over Japan.
And what was the reaction on the ground? I mean, I hear you're flying at reasonably low altitudes. What was the reaction to seeing your airplanes by the Japanese?
Well, as we shored into Japan in the outer islands, saw a lot of boats, fishing boats, we assumed. And as we got over the coast of Japan, people were waving at us. They were loading boats, fishing boats. And as we got in to Japan, we could see people playing baseball and waving at us, and it was like so far so good.
Until the Bombay doors open, and surprise! So, what were your targets, you and Colonel Doolittle?
Our target, we had incendiary bombs, and it was the bombardier's dream. He didn't have to worry about any initial point or so forth like that. It was the whole northwest part of Tokyo. Originally, Colonel Doolittle wanted to take off at dusk and fly all night. And the reason, or part of his reasoning, I guess, was that we wanted to set up since we were the first one, set up some kind of a reference point for the airplanes that were following us, particularly the ones that went on to Kobe and Nagoya.
So, and how many targets were hit, Jana? How effective were these raids of the 16? How accurate were they?
To the best of my knowledge, only one plane didn't hit either a primary or secondary target.
Right.
So, and they were pretty precise to hit military targets or things that manufactured for the military.
Yeah.
But Dick, then the challenge after you all attacked the targets was to try to get mostly to China.
Yeah.
So how did that go?
Well, after we left Japan, we flew about 75 miles or so before we made a turn toward China, trying to fool the Japanese in case they were tracking us. And as we went across the China Sea, Hank Potter, the navigator, passed a note up to us that we were going to end up about 180 miles short of the China coast. And at that time, Colonel Doolittle said, well, we'll go through our ditching procedures. But nobody was really interested in ditching because since we were flying around 200 feet, you could see sharks lying on top of the water in the sun. And anyway, we stayed the course, and as we approached the point where Hank said we'd be out of fuel, we still had fuel.
But the winds helped you then. The winds helped you.
At that time, we didn't know that we were under the influence of the big storm that was over China at the time. And it created a wind that blew from east to west. Some people called it the kamikaze wind, and we kind of liked the divine wind. We ended up with about a 30-knot tailwind, and that was how we were all able to make China.
But there was a plan for you to actually land, right?
Yeah.
But what happened with that plan?
Well, in the plan, they were supposed to have a portable Homer in China for us. Well, with the big storm, everything was socked in, and the airplane carrying the Homer to help us out crashed on the way there, and so we ended up flying at 9,000 feet on instruments over the coast and into China, and a little bit of a sweat on the gasoline.
And you finally ran out of gasoline. What was your altitude when you bailed out?
We were about 9,000 feet.
Can you describe that experience?
Our crew survived. Nobody was hurt, except maybe I shouldn't say this, that I pulled a ripcord so hard I gave myself a black eye.
And so, with your black eye, you arrived near the ground.
Yeah.
Well, where did you actually land?
We landed in southeast China, but not close to the place that we were supposed to.
Right.
We had drifted across a mountain range to the north, and everybody bailed out successfully. The next day, we all had a compass and started walking west. Knowing that if we should go into the east, that we were more liable to be picked up by the Japanese.
Right. But before you get to that, when you landed in your parachute, where did you land? Where did you wind up for the night?
The only thing I can remember about that, the Chinese said it was a Tan Mushan, and I thought it was a place, but I learned later that Tan Mushan was a kind of a name that they named most mountains. But anyway.
But did you and a tree somehow get together?
Yeah, we were all together by the next evening.
Right.
Yeah.
John, where did he wind up at the end of his parachute jump?
I do believe you were hanging in a tree. Did your chute catch on a tree and you were hanging, so it did break your fall?
So you spent the night in the tree?
Yeah, I spent the night in the tree. I didn't sleep, but I know I dozed off. I was about 12 feet high, but it was so foggy I couldn't see the ground.
Boy. So you then, with your compass, tried to find other of your shipmates. When did you run into anybody else, and who was it?
I walked all day, and I only saw 3 people. 2 students that I guess they were students. They were young Chinese, but I didn't make any kind of offering to get close to them. And the other one was a woodcutter, and he could have cared less. But about evening, I came out on a cliff, and down below was little military Chinese cantonment that had the nationalist flag flying over it. So I walked down there, and a young man, a Chinese soldier, accosted me, and he took me to a building. And in the building, there was nothing but a table and a couple of chairs. But on the table was a sketch of a two-tailed airplane with 5 parachutes coming out of it.
Wow.
And I finally got him to take me where he took the guy that drew the sketch. We walked for another couple of 100 yards, and in this building went another building, but by that time it was pretty dark, and they were lighting the inside of the building with candles, and it looked like an overcast when you went in the smoke and stuff, and I could see a shadow over here, and I couldn't distinguish who it was, but all at once they lighted 2 or 3 more candles, and it turned out to be Colonel Lula. And I said, "Boy, am I glad to see you." And he greeted me and said, happy I wasn't injured and so forth.
Right.
But later on, some Chinese loyal to
Chiang Kai-shek.
Chiang Kai-shek brought in Paul Leonard and Fred Bramer and Hank Potter.
So the 5 of you.
So we were all together that night.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
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 Jonna, what did your grandfather feel? I'm here at this point. Here they've survived. They've hit their targets. They've survived. They're in good hands for the time being. Anyway, what was your grandfather's attitude about what they had done that day and that night?
You know, the truth was he thought it was a failure. There's a picture of him that was taken by Paul Leonard. It's on the side of the mountain. He's sitting on the wing, and his B-25 is in pieces. Now, it was his first mission. Even though he served in World War I, he never served in combat. So all 80 men, their first mission. And he knows at this point in time that he has lost all of his aircraft. He has no idea where anybody but his crew is. And so he's thinking that, he's going to end up in Leavenworth. It wasn't until after the raid that they discovered the impact.
Right. So, Dick, at this point, the 5 of you are together, and how did you get into good hands, and where did you go at that point?
Well, we finally, Colonel Doolittle was bent, I guess you could call it that, on trying to find out where all the crews were and what kind of condition they were in. And we finally were taken to a place where they had a telephone. The Flying Tigers had set up a telephone net for their flyers, and he used their telephone system to try and find out where everybody was. And he wasn't about to leave until he knew enough of information that he could feel comfortable with for the rest of the crew.
He was a commander.
Yeah.
The commander. So how long did it take you? Where did you wind up? In Burma or in China?
So we ended up in Chongqing, which was the provisional capital at that time. And of course there the 10th Air Force was trying to run a war from New Delhi, India, and communication was well, zero practically. He found that he was given some money, ransom money, and we spent time trying to ransom the crews that were captured, but and he had some help from John Birch that we happened to run into, but it didn't work out. So
Right. Jonna, how many crews did actually get back in good hands?
Well, let's see. 3 members died that night, 1 bailing out, 2 drowned. 8 were captured by the Japanese. 3 of those were executed by firing squad. 1 basically was starved to death. Those 4 men that survived came home at the end of the war. 1 crew went to Russia. There's always going to be a question about that crew. But they were interned for 15 months before they escaped through Persia. And the rest of the raiders made it across China and into different assignments, some in Burma with Dick, some back in the States. So really only 7 died as a direct result of the war. Everybody else either made it back into one of the other theaters or home.
You might have thought that after pulling this off, that these guys who survived, you know, they'd bring them home and sell war bonds or whatever. And yet, what did you do?
Originally we were told that if we survived the mission, we'd get to come home. But you know how that goes.
Yeah.
It ended up there were 26 of us that didn't receive the orders to come home, and being there was better than Leavenworth. So
So you flew the hump. I mean, you were flying.
About that time, they would put out a call for pilots to go on the air link that they established between India and China. The higher-ups wanted to make sure that China was kept in the link.
Yep.
And so they commandeered quite a few C-54 passenger planes from Braniff and sent them over to that area, along with any of the pilots that were reserve officers. And there were six of us decided that we'd like to get hooked up into the process of going back and forth in China, and that's what I did.
And Mike, there's so much more to his story, and Sleeping Dogs Productions did an hour documentary that was shown earlier on the Jumbotron. That's available online to get much more detail of the story, and it's all comes, you know, firsthand from Dick about the rest of his career, which was absolutely phenomenal. It wasn't just this one raid, it was what followed, Jonna.
I was going to say, they say that the raid was dangerous, but flying the hump was equally, that aluminum highway was equally as dangerous.
What would your grandfather be thinking about Dick and his 78 colleagues?
I have to tell you, he used to say it wasn't right to have favorites, but the Doolittle Raiders were his boys. I mean, I grew up with all these uncles that they truly loved, each and every one of them. You guys called my grandmother Mama Joe. You called Gramps the boss. And he made sure that they were taken care of in any way he could. They were just part of the family. And I think he'd be particularly proud to see you right now, Dick.
Yeah.
I think he's looking down and smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
When we complete our program, we're not done yet, but when we do complete it, Dick will be over in the bookstore, And we'll not sign books, they're already signed, but have your cameras ready if you'd like to take a photograph with Dick. Also, Jana will be there signing her biography of her grandfather, so you might want to take advantage of that after we finish the program. What we're going to do, Sam Bass is one of our colleagues here. He's going to do walk-arounds of these two aircraft with Evan Fagan and Doug Jeans and talk about, these airplanes so that you can learn more about the B-25. And we'll do that in just a couple of minutes. We have time for just a couple of questions from the floor. Lady in the straw hat. And by the way, Lady in the straw hat, right there, has challenge coins for any of you that would like a challenge coins from this year's Warbirds. She is the lady to see after we finish the program. So, question?
Yes, could you tell us about the bomb sight that was designed and used?
The bomb sight. Dick, what was the bomb sight that was designed and used on the raid?
Well, since Colonel Doolittle wanted to go at low altitude, it was the Norden bomb sight was one of the things that we took out of the airplane. In doing so, they took part of the autopilot. And we didn't know this until we were manhandling the airplane. Everything worked out okay.
The bomb sight itself, though, that Ross Greening.
Her microphone.
The bomb sight that Ross Greening developed was they put a price on it as 25 cents to make. It was a protractor with a sliding thing, and it worked out very well.
Another question.
Oh, hi, Dick. First of all, thank you for your service and all you've done for the country. I got a question. When they saw that Japanese ship and they had to launch, what was the reaction of you and the crew? You understood the implications that you were going to be having to take off early than you planned, and or were you just ready to go at any time?
Yeah. What was your reaction when you learned you had to launch early? What was you and your crewmates? What was your reaction to that?
Well, as a crew, Colonel Doolittle had told us that now we might be able to do what we wanted to do, or if we get discovered early, we'll have to play it by ear and what to do. It ended up that the Nina Maru, the one that was sunk by, was the key to the whole thing. It turned out that there were quite a few battleships, enemy battleships, around Tokyo and so forth. And I think we would have been worse off if we had gone farther in.
Yeah, Jana?
There was a whole net of picket ships around the islands, and they did have the ability to radio back. I wanted to jump in here, too, for just one thing. They trained 25 crews. Only 16 airplanes made it onto the Hornet, but all crew members made it on. So any one of those guys could have stepped down at any minute. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, weren't the other crew members offering to buy your slot? Nobody did.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cole and Jana. Now, ladies and gentlemen, over to my left with the microphone, Sam Bass, with Doug Jeans and Evan Fagan. In just a moment. Sam, you're up.
Thank you, folks. Thank you for hanging around and seeing something about the B-25. I've got two experts here on the airplane. I've got Evan Fagan. He's the chief pilot in the Paper Doll here. It's a B-25J. He's the chief pilot for Fagan Fighters in Granite Falls, Minnesota, and they are big supporters of us here. So we appreciate you being here. And also, we have B-25H Barbie over here, which is part of the Kavanaugh Flight Museum, and Doug Jeans is going to be here. And so we're going to really start off with, how about telling me about something about the specifications of the B-25, the engine, horsepower, range, and that sort of stuff.
Okay, the B-25, they utilize the R2600 Wright engine. That's on takeoff, 1,700 horse, and in cruise, it's 1,500 horsepower. They're good, reliable engines, 14-cylinder. They burn about 200 gallons the first hour, 150 after that. They hold, with the outboard tanks, about 974 gallons, and about 37.5 gallons of oil each engine.
All right, Doug, how about telling us the design purpose on it? It's a medium bomber, but tell us why it was designed and who designed it.
Well, it was built by North American. Most of them were built out in California. It was designed just to be a medium bomber, something fast, get in and be a little more accurate, close-in kind of support instead of the high altitude like the heavy bombers.
How about theaters of operation? Where was it?
It was just about everywhere. You know, it was in the used in Europe, it was also used in the Pacific and down in Africa. It kind of served all over.
Now we've got two models here. How many different models did we have on this B-25?
You know, the main ones that you see around are J models. They went all the way up, I believe, to the N. The H model, of course, was the cannon nose model. So.
And we'll get into that in just a little bit. Okay. Now, how many do you think are still left flying? Do you have any idea?
I believe the total is around 40. I heard there was the PBJ just restored in California, and I heard that was like the 40th that's flying.
Okay. How about the crew? How many crew were on it?
6 crew were on the B-25.
6, and that's all models was normally 6. And what would you have? Pilot, co-pilot, what, radio operator, what else?
Yep, bombardier. You'd have the tail gunner, waist gunner, and the engineer, and pilot, co-pilot.
Okay, well, we're speaking of armament now. What was the armament and the bomb load on these particular ones? And of course, it's different on each one.
Okay, the armament, like on the J you see here, was 12 50 caliber machine guns, and as it's sitting now, it would carry 3,000 pounds of bombs. They could carry one Mark 13 torpedo, which was 2,000 pounds, or 8 5-inch high-velocity rockets. And then Doug can talk about the H.
Yeah, now this is kind of unique this year.
Yeah, the H models, of course, it's the only one still around, still flying. I believe there's one other one in the Air Force Museum up in Dayton. But it started out, they took some D models in the field and put a 75 millimeter cannon, which is the same thing that's on a Sherman tank, in there just to try to play with it, see if that helped out. That was designated as a G model, and then once they kind of perfected it, they went back to the factory and they developed the H model from the from the get-go and purely designed it and built it to carry the cannon.
Now, when they fired that thing, did they just stop it in the air?
Yeah, they said. I was just talking to somebody a few minutes ago that said the first time they fired one off, that they just got the got the aircraft and said, "Hey, go get in it, go fly, learn how to do it," and they loaded it up. And the first time that they fired it, everybody in the airplane thought that they'd hit something, and everybody started donning the parachutes. They jettisoned all the hatches and were getting ready to bail out before he could let them know, no, that was just a gun. So after that, he learned to always let them know before he fired it.
Now, where was this used and what theater was this used in, the H model?
The H model primarily was used in the Pacific Theater. Something, if everybody go look on YouTube and look up B-25 cannon, there's a great video of in the field, these things lined to about 4 or 5 of them line abreast coming into an island firing those cannons. That's pretty neat.
Well, now, how did you load the thing?
They had it's a little bit different from the B-25. It was a single pilot. The right seater was basically called a cannoneer, and his seat was a little bit further back. And he loaded the gun and then would get up out of the way. And one thing they found out, we met the guy that worked on the prototype that's in that film that I was talking about. And the first time they fired it, the breech came out of the back of the gun and went through the wall and into the bomb bay, and that patches on the airplane. in the bomb bay. So what they would do is they would load it, and then the cannoneer would get his feet up out of the way just in case that happened again or a shell was ejected around, and tap the pilot on the shoulder, and he'd fire. And it took about 1.5 minutes to get each round off.
Well, did they use it like a strafing mission, an air to ground? Is that what they were using it for?
Just about always, yeah. They just come in, line abreast. Like I said, the video really shows it pretty neat. Come in, line abreast, and attack a target, and of course shoot the 50s, get everybody's head down. And with the 50s and the tracers, just like the Sherman, it has the one gun on next to the cannon. Well, they can watch the tracers. Once they start hitting the target, then let off a cannon shell.
Yeah.
So,
well, Evan, now the airplane has got a nose wheel on it. This had to be one of the first ones with a nose wheel, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe the B-25 was, and actually the nose wheel on the B-25 is probably the hardest part of the plane to get comfortable with when you're flying it. It has a free castering nose wheel, so the first few flights taxiing, it's a little bit of a rodeo. But
well, if you overturn, can it get locked in position like a T-33 and somebody out here come to rescue you?
Well, I've heard there's been people who have knocked the front wheel off by some wild taxiing, but once you get them down, they're very easy to fly. They're good flying airplanes, but the nose wheel on these is a bit of a rodeo at first.
All right. Doug, now you're familiar airplanes. I love them.
another North American product.
You got another North American product. This is it has a kind of a gull wing to it. Why is that?
Well, the original prototype had a straight wing, and I think they had some stability issues. It also had a single tail that stuck pretty high up, and they modified it for a couple of reasons. One was single engine. They got a little bit better performance having the dual tails and one behind each prop wash, and also they could fit it in most of the hangars that were available at the time.
All right. What's the significance of your paint job and your nose art?
Well, Paper Doll was in the 321st Bomb Group, 447th Bomber Squadron in Corsica. And my mom is actually the one who picked out the scheme, and the significance and the reason I think she picked it out was because it had 125 missions, and they're depicted by the bombs painted on the side. So that's kind of.
And this is your mom?
No, it's not. No, but I think that's the reason. It had 125 missions, so we thought that was pretty significant.
Okay, that's great. How about yours?
Well, it's painted up in the 1st Air Commando, which Dick Cole, of course, was part of. And it's painted up in R.T. Smith's markings. His wife was Barbie, and R.T. Smith was one of the AVG, Flying Tigers. So he started the 1st Air Commandos, which Dick Cole was part of.
All right, let me ask you one last question here. What does it mean to you to bring these airplanes so these veterans can see it? Of course, the Second World War guys are disappearing, but we've still got Korean and Vietnam and the rest of them. They're just as interested as everybody else.
Well, I'm a little bit older than Evan here, but I've been doing it for about 30 years, and just having all the veterans coming out is just amazing, and it really brings chills to you when you see some of these guys, and they're showing their kids and their grandkids. And now, as you said, we also have a lot of Vietnam aircraft at the Kavanaugh Museum, so you're starting to see the Vietnam people coming out and seeing the airplanes and talking about them.
How about you, Evan?
Yeah, and I've been flying these for 13 years, Warbirds in general, and to get to meet the World War II vets and their families and their grandkids, it's really neat to see them connect with the airplane. And I've noticed a lot of times when these guys get close to their airplanes, they act younger, they're excited, they get to see their airplanes they used to fly in combat, and those are the real pilots. We get to fly them for fun. Those guys flew them getting shot at and using them for their intended use. So it's fun to get to let those guys see it in the museum and get back with them.
And by the way, any of you folks that get by Granite Falls, you need to go there. They've got some unique things. For instance, they've got sand that actually came from D-Day. So if you can, stop by there. And thanks again. Thank you for bringing your beautiful airplane here. And thank you, sir.
Thanks, Sam.
We'll see you again. Thank you.